For 10 years, I took care of my husband, Jared, believing he was disabled. I gave up my dreams and worked hard to support us. But then, I found out the truth. He had been pretending all this time. I was furious and knew I had to make him pay. My plan for revenge would leave him regretting every deceitful act. One day, I came home early from my shift at the diner. I heard voices coming from the living room. Jared was laughing and chatting with one of his friends. I stood behind the partially opened door, watching. Jared stood up from his wheelchair effortlessly. My mouth dropped open, and anger surged through me. How did I not realize sooner? This moment changed everything. Realizing that Jared had been lying for years, I knew I had to do something. I didn't want to confront him immediately. I wanted him to experience the same frustration and deceit. I decided to gather evidence first. Recording his movements and conversations became a nightly ritual. The more I collected, the clearer my path for revenge became. I just needed the perfect moment. Over the next few weeks, I watched Jared closely, capturing every moment he slipped up. There were several instances where he got up to fetch something or walked around when he thought no one was watching. Each video clip and photograph added to my arsenal. I felt a growing sense of control with each piece of evidence. Soon, it would be time to confront him. I planned a night out at a local restaurant for Jared and me, secretly inviting a few friends who had doubted his disability. We arrived and enjoyed our meal, pretending everything was normal. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to the restroom. When I returned, I whispered to our friends, setting my plan into motion. They started discussing how some people fake disabilities for money. Our friends' conversation grew more intense. They shared stories of people faking disabilities, making subtle glances at Jared. His face turned red. He grew uncomfortable. "Why would anyone do that?" he stammered. "It's disgusting." I noticed his hands gripping the edge of the table. My heart pounded, waiting for the moment he'd expose himself under pressure. I leaned in closer, my eyes gleaming with anticipation. Jared's discomfort was palpable. Just as the tension seemed unbearable, he angrily pushed back his chair. "This is ridiculous! People don't just fake disabilities!" he shouted, standing up without thinking. Our friends gasped. The restaurant grew silent. Jared froze, realizing his mistake. He looked at me, panic in his eyes. I smiled, enjoying the satisfaction of watching his world crumble. Now everyone knew the truth. After his outburst, Jared quickly tried to sit back down, but the damage was done. Murmurs spread across the restaurant. People pointed and whispered. "See, I told you," one friend said loudly. Jared's face turned even redder as he shrunk in his seat. "What are you doing?" he hissed at me. "Exposing the truth," I replied calmly. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. There was no going back. We drove home in complete silence. As soon as we walked in the door, Jared exploded. "How could you do that to me?" he yelled. Without missing a beat, I pulled out my phone and showed him the recordings. "How could you do this to me?" I shot back. He watched the evidence, speechless, his lies laid bare. "You've ruined everything," he whispered, defeated. I smiled coldly. With Jared exposed and humiliated, I felt an overwhelming sense of justice. I had spent 10 years trapped by his deceit, but now I was free. I started making plans for my own future, one where I followed my dreams and lived for myself. Jared would have to find a way to fend for himself. My revenge was complete, and it was time for me to reclaim my life. Jared sat on the couch, his head in his hands. "Please, I can explain," he began, but I cut him off. "Explain what, Jared? How you lied for a decade," I snapped. He fumbled for words, his voice shaking. "I was scared you'd leave me if you knew the truth." I scoffed, disbelief washing over me. "No, Jared, you were scared of being alone and found out." I turned away from him, pacing the room. "How much money did we waste because of your act?" I demanded. "All those medical bills, equipment? For what?" Jared followed me with his eyes but stayed glued to the couch. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I did it to keep us together." I laughed bitterly. "All you did was for yourself, Jared. You never thought about us." The next day, I started packing my things. Jared watched, a helpless look on his face. "Where are you going?" he asked, panic in his voice. "Wherever I want," I replied. "You've had your freedom, now it's my turn." As I piled my clothes into a suitcase, he tried to reach for my hand. I pulled away. "Don't," I warned. "You've done enough damage." After I left, I called my old friend Lisa. She had always doubted Jared's condition. "You were right," I admitted over the phone. "He's been lying this whole time." Lisa sighed deeply. "I knew something was off," she replied. "What are you going to do now?" I paused, looking at the city skyline. "Start over, I guess. It's time I focus on what I want." I found a small apartment downtown, close to my job at the diner. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I unpacked my suitcase, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Jared had blown up my phone with messages, but I ignored them. This was my chance to rebuild, free from his lies. I set up my new place, feeling more in control with every step. A few weeks later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Lisa standing there, holding a box. "Thought you might need some help settling in," she said with a smile. Inside the box were some kitchen essentials and a few decorations. "Thanks," I said, touched by her gesture. We spent the evening setting up my apartment, talking about old times. One evening, as I was closing the diner, Jared appeared. "We need to talk," he insisted. I sighed, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "Fine," I said, leading him to a corner booth. He looked worn out, the weight of his lies evident in his eyes. "Please give me another chance," he begged. I shook my head. "You broke my trust, Jared. There's no fixing that." The next day, I felt a sense of purpose. I signed up for an art class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. As I walked into the first session, I felt a surge of excitement. The teacher welcomed me, and I found my seat. I realized this new chapter wasn't just about leaving Jared behind. It was about rediscovering myself. In the art class, I met other people who shared my passion. We bonded over shared stories and laughter. Each stroke of paint on the canvas felt liberating. I had spent so long caring for someone else. It was time I cared for myself. The teacher encouraged us to express our feelings through art, and I did. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Weeks turned into months, and I found myself thriving. My job at the diner, my art class, my new friends, they all gave me a sense of belonging. Jared tried to reach out several times, but I stayed firm. I had started to build a life that was mine alone. The pain of his betrayal began to fade, replaced by the joy of new beginnings. One afternoon, as I was getting ready for my art class, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Jared standing there, looking disheveled. "What do you want?" I asked, annoyance creeping into my voice. He looked at me with pleading eyes. "Can we at least talk?" he whispered. I hesitated but knew that closing the door in his face wouldn't end things. "Fine, come in," I said, stepping aside. Jared walked in, glancing around my small apartment. "You've made a nice place for yourself," he said softly. I crossed my arms, waiting. "What do you want, Jared?" He sat down on the couch, taking a deep breath. "I miss you," he started. I shook my head. "You miss the act, not me," I retorted. "You broke something that can't be fixed." "I know I messed up," Jared admitted, his voice shaking. "I was afraid of losing you, and I let that fear take over." I sighed, feeling a mix of emotions. "You lied to me for 10 years, Jared. You don't just get to sorry your way out of this." He looked down, guilt evident in his eyes. "I'm willing to do anything to make things right," he said. "Anything?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Anything," he repeated. I felt a surge of anger. "Then leave me alone," I said firmly. "I need space to figure out who I am without you." Jared seemed to deflate, but he nodded. "If that's what you need, I'll respect it," he said, quietly. He stood up and walked to the door. "I really am sorry," he added before leaving. After he left, I sat down, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him, to give him another chance. But the logical part of me knew better. I had come this far on my own, and I wasn't about to let him derail my progress. I took a deep breath, reminding myself why I left him in the first place. His deception was unforgivable. The next day, I focused on moving forward. I threw myself into my job at the diner, taking extra shifts to stay busy. In my art class, I started a new project, pouring my emotions into each stroke of the brush. My friends noticed the change. "You seem more at peace," Lisa commented one evening. "I am," I replied, feeling the truth in my words. As the weeks passed, I began to form deeper connections with my classmates. We shared laughs and stories, building a sense of community. One evening, after class, a fellow student named Mark approached me. "Your work is amazing," he said, admiring my latest painting. "Thanks," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "I've been through a lot, and art helps me express that." Mark and I started spending more time together outside of class. He was kind, funny, and shared my passion for art. "You've come a long way," he remarked one evening as we worked on our projects. "Yeah, it's been a journey," I admitted. I felt a deep sense of comfort around him, something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, I could open up again. One afternoon, as I sorted through old photographs, I found a picture of Jared and me from happier times. A wave of nostalgia hit me, but I knew I had to let go. I placed the photo in a box labeled Past, sealing it shut. My life was moving forward, and there was no room for his deceit anymore. I was finally ready to embrace my new future. With Jared finally behind me, I threw myself fully into my new life. I took on more responsibilities at work and began hosting art nights with my new friends. One night, as we laughed and painted together, I realized how far I'd come. My journey was no longer about revenge. It was about rediscovering myself and finding joy in the little moments. My future was mine to define. Weeks after starting my new life, I received an unexpected visit from Mark, Jared's best friend. He looked uneasy. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, but then invited him in. Mark seemed troubled. "I didn't know Jared lied to you," he explained. "He kept it all hidden." I nodded, not surprised. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, crossing my arms, bracing for whatever was coming next. "He asked me to give you this," Mark said, handing me a sealed envelope. I stared at it, unsure whether to open it or rip it apart. Sensing my hesitation, Mark added, "I think it's an apology." With a sigh, I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Jared, begging for forgiveness and explaining his reasons. Tears welled up, but I pushed them back. "I don't know if you care to hear it," Mark began, "but Jared has been a mess since you left. He's lost weight, barely sleeps." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "He should have thought about that before lying for a decade," I retorted. Mark looked pained. "I'm not excusing him, but he's my friend. I just hoped you might consider talking to him." I sighed. This wasn't what I expected. After Mark left, I sat alone with Jared's letter, conflicted. It was filled with apologies and expressed his regret, but I wasn't sure if I could believe him. Trust had been shattered, and it wouldn't be easily rebuilt. I decided I needed time to think. I placed the letter in a drawer, unwilling to let it disrupt the new life I was rebuilding. Jared's actions couldn't be erased. Days turned into weeks, but the letter stayed in my mind. I talked to Lisa, needing an outside perspective. "Do you think I should forgive him?" I asked. Lisa frowned. "Forgive, maybe, but forget?" "No way," she said firmly. "He betrayed you in the worst way. Don't let his guilt disrupt your journey." Her words were a comfort, but the emotional weight of the letter still lingered. I decided to take a solo trip to clear my head, visiting a small town by the coast that I'd always wanted to see. I walked the scenic trails and visited local shops, letting the sea air refresh my spirit. Sitting on a cliffside bench, I reflected on my past and my future. This trip was for me, to center myself and remember the strength I had found. When I returned from my trip, my heart felt lighter. The solitude had been invigorating. As I entered my apartment, a sense of relief washed over me. This place was my sanctuary, free from the shadows of Jared's deceptions. I unpacked my bags, unpacking my thoughts along with them. The time away had solidified my determination to focus on my future. I was done looking back. I returned to my routines with renewed energy. At work, I noticed a flyer for a manager position. Feeling confident, I applied, seeing this as another step towards my independence. My art classes continued to be a source of joy and expression. I created pieces that were both vibrant and meaningful, reflecting my journey. Life was falling into place, and I felt more in control every day. One evening, I received a call from Jared's sister, Emily. "Can we meet?" she asked. Her voice sounded urgent. I reluctantly agreed, meeting her at a nearby cafe. Emily looked distressed. "Jared's not doing well," she admitted. "He's really spiraled." I felt a pang of guilt, but quickly pushed it aside. I had to remind myself why things were this way, and refocused my thoughts on moving forward. Seeing Emily's plea troubled me more than I wanted to admit. "I appreciate your concern, Emily," I said, sipping my coffee. "But Jared made his choices." She nodded, understanding, but still hopeful. "Just think about it," she said before leaving. I sat there, wrestling with unresolved feelings. Jared's actions had consequences, but that didn't mean tossing away years of memories was easy. The road ahead was clearer, but not without bumps. One morning, as I was leaving my apartment, I nearly bumped into Jared's mother. "Jean?" I exclaimed, shocked. She looked frail, but determined. "We need to talk," she said firmly. I invited her in, offering tea. "I just heard about Jared's deception," she began, her voice trembling. I nodded, bracing myself. "I'm so sorry," she continued. "I never imagined he could do something so horrible." John had always been a strong presence, but now she looked devastated. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness on behalf of our family," she said, her eyes welling up. "He fooled all of us." I took a deep breath, feeling unexpected empathy. "It's not your fault," I reassured her. "You had no idea." We sat in silence, both processing the depth of Jared's betrayal. Jean took my hand. "Please, tell me everything," she urged. I recounted the years of deceit, the moment I discovered the truth, and the confrontation. Her face paled as she listened, her fingers tightening around mine. "My poor son," she whispered. "He's lost everything because of his lies." Nodding, I added, "And so have I. But I'm rebuilding my life, and I'm stronger for it." John sighed heavily. "I wish I could turn back time, make things right," she said softly. I shook my head. "We can't change the past, John," I replied, "but we can learn from it." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You're a remarkable woman," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "Thank you," I responded. "But it's time for me to move on." After Jean left, I felt a sense of closure. My journey wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about healing and rebuilding. Later that week, Mark invited me to an art exhibition. "You'll love it," he promised. We walked through the gallery admiring the pieces. "You should exhibit your work someday," Mark suggested. I smiled, feeling encouraged. "Maybe I will," I replied, feeling more confident. Several days later, my boss at the diner, Mr. Thompson, called me into his office. "I've been watching your dedication," he began. "How would you like to be a shift supervisor?" I was surprised and thrilled. "I'd love to," I replied eagerly. This new role felt like a step forward, a recognition of my hard work and resilience. It was another piece of my rebuilt life. That evening, Mark and I celebrated my promotion at a cozy cafe. "You deserve all the good things coming your way," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine with his. "Thank you for believing in me." We spent the night talking about our dreams and aspirations. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future and what it held. One afternoon, while running errands, I saw Jared outside a grocery store. He looked lost, his face weary. He spotted me and waved hesitantly. I approached him cautiously. "How have you been?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Not great," he admitted, looking at the ground. "I've been thinking a lot." I nodded, unsure of what to say. This wasn't the man I once knew. Jared looked up, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm in therapy now," he confessed, trying to understand why I did what I did. I felt a mix of emotions, but mostly relief. "That's good to hear," I replied. "But we're on different paths now." He nodded, understanding. "I hope you find peace," he said softly. "You too," I replied, feeling a weight lift off me. Walking away from Jared, I felt a sense of closure. Our lives had diverged, and that was okay. Returning to my apartment, I thought about the new opportunities and relationships blossoming around me. I hung up a new painting, a symbol of my journey and growth. This new chapter was mine to write, full of possibilities and hope. And this time, I was in control. As the days passed, I felt the tight grip of doubt loosening. Maybe Jared was truly remorseful. Still, it didn't erase the years of deceit. I confided in Lisa about Emily's visit. "Don't let guilt cloud your judgment," she warned. Her words were a stark reminder of my new reality. Yet gnawing thoughts about Jared's suffering lingered, battling against the progress I had made. The following weeks, Emily reached out again, inviting me to a small family gathering. "It's just us," she promised gently. Intrigued and a little hesitant, I agreed. At the gathering, I noticed how Jared had indeed changed. He looked worn out, but seeing him also evoked old memories. We exchanged brief glances, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of connection. During the gathering, while everyone chatted, Jared and I stole a moment outside. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" I asked, breaking the silence. Jared looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "I was afraid you'd leave me." And once the lie started, it was hard to stop. His honesty stung, but it was the first genuine conversation we'd had in years. "We can't change the past," I said softly. Jared nodded, tears forming. "But I'm trying to change now," he explained. I took a deep breath, feeling conflicted yet again. His words were sincere, but years of deception left a deep wound. "I need more than words," I replied. We stood in silence, the weight of our shared history pressing down, seeking a path toward closure. Over the next few weeks, Jared made efforts to show genuine change. He attended therapy and joined support groups. I watched from afar, cautiously optimistic. One evening, he invited me for coffee. His efforts were apparent, but my guard remained up. "I'm willing to forgive, but rebuilding trust takes time," I stated firmly. Jared agreed, understanding that actions spoke louder than words. We started reconnecting, one step at a time. Our occasional meetings felt therapeutic. Jared shared his progress, and I shared my new interests. We avoided heavy topics, focusing on being present in the moment. One afternoon, over coffee, he unexpectedly apologized again, this time more heartfelt. "I'm so sorry for everything, truly." For the first time, his words didn't feel hollow. Slowly, old wounds began to heal, though scars remained, reminding me to stay cautious. As we spent more time together, it became essential to redraw boundaries. We discussed our individual goals, ensuring space and respect for each other's journey. "We can't jump back to where we were," I emphasized. Jared nodded in agreement. "I understand," he said sincerely. Mutual respect grew, and for the first time, we both appreciated the value of clear, healthy boundaries in our renewed relationship. With every conversation, respect blossomed between us. Jared's persistent efforts to change and my determination to guard my newfound independence created an unexpected harmony. One evening, sitting at a park bench, we talked about our future. "I'm not promising anything grand, but I promise honesty," Jared vowed. I nodded, appreciating his growth. We both understood that whatever came next would be built on mutual respect and transparency. Months passed, and Jared and I settled into a new kind of relationship. Not lovers, but two individuals who had learned and grown from their past mistakes. He focused on his recovery, and I delved deeper into my art and work. Our shared growth was evident, creating an unspoken bond. We supported each other not out of obligation, but from a place of genuine care and understanding. Finally, our interactions felt natural, free from the burden of past deceit. Jared continued his journey toward self-improvement, and I thrived in my newfound independence. The revenge that once consumed my thoughts had transformed into a foundation for personal growth for both of us. Life continued to unfold, showing that even from deep scars, new beginnings could emerge. Our paths had diverged, but were still intertwined with respect and hope. As Mark and I spent more time together, he finally opened up about his past. "I used to be where you are," he said one evening, as we walked by the waterfront. "I had a toxic relationship that left me shattered." His words made me pause. "How did you move forward?" I asked. Mark smiled sadly. "One step at a time, just like you're doing now." Mark's confession deepened our bond. We began to share more about our lives, our hopes, and our fears. "Trust is hard to rebuild after betrayal," I admitted. Mark nodded, understanding. "It takes time and patience," he said. Our conversations were comforting, like balm to my wounds. I felt a sense of connection that I hadn't felt in years. Slowly, I was opening my heart again. One weekend, I decided to reconnect with some old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. We met at a cafe downtown, laughter and nostalgia flooding the air. "We missed you," my friend Sarah said, squeezing my hand. "I missed you all too," I replied, feeling grateful. Being around familiar faces brought back a sense of belonging and helped me realize how far I'd come. As my life continued to settle into a new normal, Mark surprised me with an invitation. "There's an artist retreat in the mountains next month," he said. "Would you like to come?" I hesitated, thinking about the responsibilities I had. But then I remembered my commitment to self-discovery. "I'd love to," I replied with a smile. This retreat seemed like the perfect opportunity for growth. In the weeks leading up to the retreat, I focused on preparing myself. I gathered my art supplies, mentally preparing for the creative journey ahead. At the diner, Mr. Thompson was supportive. "Take all the time you need," he encouraged. My friends were equally enthusiastic. You've earned this, Lisa said, giving me a hug. With their support, I felt ready to embrace this new experience. The day of the retreat arrived, and Mark and I drove up to the mountains together. The scenery was breathtaking, a perfect backdrop for creativity. This place is amazing, I said, taking in the view. We settled into our cabins, excitement bubbling within me. The retreat was filled with artists from all walks of life, and I couldn't wait to learn and grow alongside them. During the retreat, I felt a creative awakening. The workshops were inspiring, pushing me to explore new techniques and ideas. One of the instructors, Maya, encouraged us to dig deep into our emotions. Art is a reflection of the soul, she said. I found myself pouring my heart onto the canvas, creating pieces that resonated with my journey. Mark and I grew even closer during this time. One afternoon, while painting a serene landscape, I experienced a moment of clarity. I realized how far I'd come from the woman who had been deceived by Jared. I was no longer shackled by his lies. My art was a testament to my resilience and strength. As the retreat came to an end, I felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. I was ready to face the future with confidence. Returning home from the retreat, I felt rejuvenated. The experience had given me new perspectives and renewed passion for my art. I hung my latest piece on the wall, a symbol of my growth and transformation. Life was falling into place beautifully. I reconnected with Mark and our friends, sharing stories and laughter. My once fragile world was now robust and full of promise. I was finally free. With the retreat behind me, I fully embraced the new beginnings ahead. I continued to excel at work and pursued new art projects with vigor. Mark and I grew even closer, our bond solid and supportive. My past with Jared felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the vibrant life I was now living. For the first time in years, I felt truly happy and excited about what lay ahead.